In the context of the paradigm shift in global energy production, unconventional energy and by implication fracking represents, and we've seen that in the United States, in France and in the UK, the development of fracking in other parts of the world, in this case in Latin America and in Argentina, has obviously brought with it some strong opposition currents from civil society. In Argentina, which is the new frontier in unconventional energy and in the use of fracking, and we're talking here specifically about the Vaca Muerta field in Neuquén province in the south of Argentina, there's been a lot of public debate around the practice of fracking. Argentina itself has a long tradition of very strong social activism from civil society across a whole range of issues, and indeed social activism in the past has brought down Argentine governments. So there's a key question around fracking in Argentina is the extent to which activism, in this case environmental activism in particular, can erect barriers to the development of unconventional energy and fracking in Argentina. Of course, a key question here is the impact that such activism can have on foreign investors into energy in Argentina. Argentina is a fairly unpredictable operational environment and has been so increasingly over the last 3 or 4 years. Specifically on energy, perhaps the clearest example of that was the government's expropriation of the majority share of the YPF oil firm from Spain's Repsol in mid-2012. That was conducted with very little prior warning, and no compensation was offered in the aftermath, despite the fact that Repsol had said that they were prepared to go to international arbitration. The Argentine authorities decided not to so do. There are a number of other unpredictabilities in the Argentine operational environment under the current government of President Cristina Fernández de Kirchner. That ranges across a whole swathe of policy areas, from public subsidies to media law to attempts to shift the control of the central bank. So that's the broad context that flag concerns for investors into this particular field. Of course, there is a level of counterbalancing there because Argentina currently is facing some very serious fiscal and economic problems, very high inflation, falling foreign currency reserves, and a very significant energy deficit where imports are outbalancing Argentine production year on year. Those drivers may to some extent balance the concerns that investors have about Vaca Muerta, and indeed there are a number of major oil companies who've expressed some level of interest in going into Vaca Muerta if the conditions are right. A central question, of course, given what I've already said about the strength of civil society movements in Argentina and about the uncertain operational environment because of the nature of the current government, is the extent to which environmental anti-fracking activists can derail the development of unconventional energy in Argentina generally, and in this case in the Vaca Muerta fields specifically. It's worth noting here that there were conflicts in Neuquén outside the provincial legislature in August 2013 when that legislature approved a deal between YPF and Chevron to partner in part of the Vaca Muerta field. And that certainly seems to indicate the strength of feeling amongst activists against fracking in that part of Argentina, and more broadly the opposition to the engagement of foreign investors in unconventionals in Argentina. It's also worth noting that those protests took place only 1 month before midterm legislative elections in Argentina. And that ties quite closely to the general political uncertainty around who will be the successor to current President Cristina Fernández de Kirchner in 2015. It would seem then that there is a very strong context for environmental activists to push against fracking in Argentina. And indeed, it's a fact that almost 30 municipalities in Argentina have legislated against fracking, effectively banning it from those municipalities. It's also true that there have been isolated incidents where campaigners and activists have attempted to gain access to facilities of oil companies in Neuquén province itself. However, the balance against that is quite clear. Both the federal government and the provincial authorities in Neuquén are both 100% behind fracking for reasons which fundamentally relate to revenues and royalties. The federal government itself, of course, has some very significant fiscal problems at the moment and has a very significant concern over depleted foreign currency reserves. A large part of that is about an energy deficit. The provincial authorities are one of the authorities in Argentina which has the highest level of public employment and is most dependent on oil for its revenues. So both of those levels of governments have a very strong reason to support fracking and push it through. Furthermore, it's also worth noting that any of the potential candidates that have so far raised their hands with regard to 2015 presidential elections have all fundamentally lined up in support of fracking. All have said that they would support further fracking, and they view this as being a crucial factor in Argentina's economic health moving forward. So that the political dynamics at play here are very clearly in support of fracking, and that certainly outweighs for the short to medium term, and I would argue actually for the far longer term, up to 10 to 15 years outlook, that fracking will be able to go forward with only minimal interference from environmental activists, either in the form of very specific but sporadic attempts to gain access to operating facilities, or attempts to leverage environmental movements through the labour unions, for example, and by that means to gain influence over the provincial and federal government.